Maha live with you from the LinkedIn Hub at Advertising Week, and I have with me Linda Ong. And Linda is the CEO and founder of TruthCo. And I just have one word: culture, culture, culture,
yes.
culture. And,
yes,
you know, I have
culture.
to say, yes, culture. I have to say, there's been so many buzzwords that we've been talking about here at Advertising Week in the interviews I've done since yesterday, but culture hasn't been one of them. So I am really fascinated to talk about something about these same topics that we're talking about, but from a very different perspective.
Right.
So let's start. You said you have a different definition of culture. Now,
yeah.
I thought I knew what culture was, but I'm happy to hear a new definition. So let's start with that.
I can't say it's the only one or the newest one, but it's the one that we use when we look at what's going on in the wider world. Mm-hmm. And that is really about the shared communication of a society. What are the ideas and images and codes and cues and messages that we use to symbolize or to effectively connect with people that we consider in our culture? So we look at American culture as a society, but we call ourselves an omnicultural agency because we also look at all the different subcultures in America, whether it's millennials or Hispanic biculturals or fanboys, any kind of culture that is emerging, any kind of society, whether it's a small society, a niche society, or American culture at large. We look at what are the common codes, cues, and communications that those societies have that really are a way of just kind of winking at your audience.
I think that's really interesting because you talked about what maybe my automatic standard definition of culture is like. You know, I'm Middle Eastern. That's my culture. You know,
right.
like I'm a Arab American or whatever. But you're also talking about other cultures that I may share with other people,
that's
like
right.
our technology culture or our mobile culture or this or that or whatever. So I think it's really interesting that you're factoring in all that. Another thing we were talking about related to culture is what is then our cultural relationship with advertising, and you were saying that it's actually shifted. It's actually different now than it has been previously.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, we've seen what's happened in the past 2 to 5 years with an explosion of content, that it's really changed the consumer's relationship with how they interact with and what they expect from content. So just to go to content for a second, we all understand now that when you sit down and you want to watch TV, you used to have 3 choices, back in the day, and now you have an infinite amount, right? So the decision-making process to watch television has fundamentally changed, and that has created new pressure on, as we've seen, the business models, but also on the creators, that they have to make different kinds of content. We see an audience that's more interested in quality and more sophisticated content. We have an audience that basically will not watch reality television without subtitles, if you've ever seen reality television. And for years growing up in television, I was told Americans won't read subtitles. But if you've seen a reality show, they're either drunk, speaking in an accent, or they're peeing. So we need the subtitles, and that's not a problem. You even see television shows coming out now with entire characters speaking foreign languages, entirely subtitled. So that's a major shift.
That is a major shift, yeah, absolutely.
And there's millions of those in content. So it only goes to follow that advertising is going to go through a similar paradigm shift with audiences and their relationship, in that it used to be that in the heyday of advertising since the Mad Men era, that advertisers taught us how to live. They gave us our aspirations. We wanted to have our whites whiter and our teeth brighter, and we wanted to live and acquire.
They made us need things we didn't know we needed.
Exactly. But they showed us that we could consume our way to a better existence. And to a certain extent, that was probably right and good. But after the economic collapse in 2008, the culture in America became one that, and is increasingly fueled by millennials, that rejected this kind of mass, voracious consumerism for self-serving needs. And we see now that in an era in advertising where communications are no longer one way, and we're no longer captive audiences for a commercial that can make us drink a soft drink because we feel like that's the thing to do to be in this society. Now we know there's so many choices that we really want to have conversations with advertisers, and that conversation can be literal in terms of social media, or it can be figurative in that we, as I said, ads used to teach us how to live. Now they teach us how to think, to think about the impact of our consumerism. Is it helping the environment? Is it helping each other? You have a lot of spots that are now really espousing shared values more than product features and benefits.
Yeah.
So you see that there's a different decision criteria that consumers are making, and we're starting to see advertising reflect that more.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on a really important point, which is the shift in the kind of, I mean, I've spoken to several people about this, but it's, you know, there is now a certain focus on authenticity when it comes to the brand. Right. Letting its consumers, letting its target buyers know more about its brand values and its brand integrity, and sharing that as a way of getting people to connect with them and buy.
Yes, advertisers need to understand that consumers are no longer going to sort of outspend each other to acquire things. What they're going to do is they want to invest their time, their money, their loyalty into brands and products that have meaning to them. And that could be personal meaning, but we're increasingly seeing that it's more about meaning on a larger scale, on quite a human scale, and really about embracing common values across borders. And actually, it's interesting because we're seeing now, in the content world, and I'm hoping it's going to come to the advertising world, more of an integration of international points of view, literally, not just, as you were talking about, Middle Eastern heritage or Chinese heritage, but literally plucking thoughts from people, citizens of China and the Middle East, to understand how to espouse some of these values that advertisers stand for. We're seeing that in the content world. We've seen a lot of Turkish formats, Swedish formats, all kinds of, you know, even ABC now has an a Bollywood star in the lead. You're seeing that, and it's only natural advertising will follow that as well.
I know that your main focus is television. You guys do a lot of television work, and I mean, just looking at some of the brands that you've worked on, you know, Ellen, Animal Planet, Bravo, etc. And I want to talk a little bit about how, you know, obviously culture is so important to you and the wider culture, and how you factor that in with the work you do for the brands that you work with.
Right, great question. Well, I think that before we pioneered this kind of cultural analysis in the television space, there had always been different kinds of consumer-led metrics or insights. So you always had Nielsen ratings, love them or hate them, we always had them, right? We always had focus groups and surveys and, you know, quant and qual. And all that data we know now is increasingly being mined, and people are, you know, having a great time exploring all the possibilities of data. But what we realize is that with all this information, you need to have a context, and you need to have a cultural context for understanding what to do with this information. So, for example, if I tell you a new show premiered last night and it had a 2 rating, is that good or bad? You need to know the context of that. Is it cable? Is it broadcast? Is it a show that had a 10 last week or a 1 last week? So you need that context. And similarly for our television clients, whether it's in their marketing or their shows themselves or their brands, and that they need to understand how they're being received in culture. Are they being perceived as somebody who's the epitome of the zeitgeist, or someone who's behind the times, or someone who's leading a new charge? And very often what we find is when you're only relying on consumer-led insights or ratings, you're only analyzing what has been, and you know, looking for patterns in the past. And when culture changes as significantly as it has in the last 2 to 5 years, arguably more changes happen in culture in the last 5 years than happened in the first 60, 70 years of television, right? And television and a lot of media is trying to catch up now. So what we just really try to do is reconcile those two things. Here's where your brand is. Here's how your internal view of your brand or your product or your show aligns with the external perception. And right now, perception is reality, and culture is always going to win. You can think you've got the most hot shit product or brand on the planet, but if culture doesn't think that way, first of all, they'll
conversations
tell you,
aren't happening about it.
They'll tell you in Twitter in a heartbeat.
Ooh, yeah.
You know, so I think that it's really about not being in a bubble anymore and really trying to align what's going on in the outside world with it.
You talked. You mentioned the data mining, and you know, we've talked so much about big data and how that's being used to, you know, scale relevance. And I know that that's another thing you have an interesting perspective on, and maybe a slightly different perspective is on relevance.
Yeah, well, so let's define the word relevance, right? So another word people have used. So relevance is a relationship. Relevance is about what a person knows and what they're being presented with, right? So what's relevant to you may be different than what's relevant to the guy who was looking in the window, right? As I like to say, what's hip and cool to Nicki Minaj is not the same thing that's hip and cool to Jeb Bush, but they might use the same.
That would be a safe bet, I would think.
Yeah. Maybe. So, so relevance is relative, right? And the only way to really measure relevance is either to ask somebody, which again, is helpful, but may not tell you what might be relevant to them tomorrow. They can tell you what's relevant today and in the past, but they can't tell you about ideas that maybe are in formation in their head. But we can look at all the things that people are saying in mass media and social media and every kind of man-made in art and music and any kind of man-made communication form, and tell you what they're talking about that may change that person's mind. So I think part of it is
it's a little preemptive and it's a little predictive,
well,
I think.
And we try not to get in the future casting or forecasting world, but I like to say it's anticipatory. We can really see the conversations bubbling up, and when new ideas take momentum and old ones start falling out of favor, now it's very easy to see because you can see it on social media. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, another thing that's changed significantly in the culture is it used to be that people would only write in or voice an opinion when they were mad. And now with social media, we've seen in the past couple of years that an equal number will come to an idea's defense or promote it's a very millennial idea to promote things that they love. Mm-hmm. So, I kind of feel like, well, the wisdom of the crowd usually can, figure out what the truth is. But there are still a lot of advertisers very afraid of having anything negative said about them. But what I always say is when people have when there's a vociferous majority that is in favor of your brand and you have people that are questioning that, let them at it, because the people that are going to be the supporters and the loyalists and the advocates of your brand will shut down the haters. And so not be afraid of, in fact,
when you have
that spice, it becomes buzzy, right? Buzz isn't just propelled on positivity. Mm-hmm.
That gets old, I think, kind of quick. Yeah.
And by the way, if everyone agrees with you, why are you going to talk about it, right? And so some of the buzziest things that happen because people don't agree, right? And so in terms of relevance, what I say to clients now is, that you shouldn't be afraid of that. You should. It's not to say court controversy, but if it's natural, enable it. And I think that's really, it's got a negative connotation, so I'm looking for a better word, but advertisers really need to be enablers of the conversation.
Right.
And the conversations that are near and dear to the advertisers' hearts, right? But if something's important to them and they want people to talk about laundry stains, that's fine, but it's no longer about teaching people they need to not want them, right? It's about to understand what the company's philosophy, as you said, what the point of view of this company is, and if I believe the same thing as the company believes, then I'm more inclined to support them.
Absolutely. And lastly, I just want to get your thoughts on, you work with a lot of brands, and you also, I'm sure, see a lot of brands out there doing all kinds of things, and I'm sure you've got your finger on the pulse of that. So just a few brands in your mind that are getting it right, that are, keenly or acutely aware of the bigger culture and factoring it into the work that they do.
Yeah, great question. Totally on the spot, but I'll try to answer
sorry.
it.
Okay.
I like it. I like being surprised. I'm in my panel this afternoon, I'm going to show a couple of spots that do that. One is really, really one that I've been very taken with, which is an Airbnb spot. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Is Mankind? And if you think about essentially what Airbnb and the Ubers and all these new economy companies have done is essentially taking existing businesses and taking out the middleman. So if you think of it that way, Airbnb is essentially in the hotel business. It just happens to be their rooms are all over and owned by different people. But essentially, they're in the accommodations business, right? And we've all seen holiday and spots and ads from the Four Seasons, and we know what hotel advertising is about. It's always about the luxury and the mattress and the sense of privilege,
or the value,
yeah. Right? In the case of a Holiday Inn,
yeah.
It's about or the free breakfast and the free internet. But what Airbnb did is they said, first of all, a lot of those things they can't compete on. But what they realize is their fundamental promise is not about putting butts in beds. It's really about getting people to meet each other, because a lot of the people that are home away and Airbnb and those kinds of people that share their homes do it to meet people. So their ad was all about mankind and humanity. That's a pretty tall order for, an accommodations booking service, if you think about it.
That is kind of, I was like, whoa, that's a big one.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and plus, even if you're not going there to stay, if you're just staying on your own, you still, when you travel, are learning about other people. So when they understood their fundamental promise was about helping humans connect, that takes them out of the sort of the sheets and beds and baths category, right? And so there's only going to be certain people that are attracted to that. There's certainly a group of people who would rather have their thread count and their, and their mint on the pillow. But that's the last thing I would say, is that we're really shifting to a society that is going to have more in common on a psychographic level than a demographic. So I think that for advertisers to really understand they can cultivate communities based on like-mindedness is going to be huge.
That's fantastic. I love that last one. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of advertising week.
Thank you. You too.
It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.